In this video, I will upgrade the stereo on this Toyota Corolla with a high-quality Pioneer stereo that features a 13-band graphic equalizer and Apple CarPlay as well as Android Auto for seamless integration with your mobile devices. The new stereo will improve sound quality significantly, and I'll play a before and after sound sample at the end of this video. So let's go over the parts that I'll be using. To mount the stereo, I have a Metra mounting kit, which comes with a trim cover that matches the dashboard finish perfectly, and it also comes with mounting brackets that will fit most aftermarket stereos. To connect the wires, I have a CRUX Swarty 61N kit, which is compatible with most aftermarket stereos. By using this harness, I will be able to connect the stereo without modifying any of the factory wiring on the car, and it will also help to keep the steering wheel controls as well as the USB auxiliary input and the backup camera. So let's go over the tools that I'll be using now. In order to make secure wire connections, I like to use a soldering iron and solder. To prepare the wire, I'll use a pair of wire strippers and pliers, and I also have some high quality heat shrink and a heat gun to make sure that the heat shrink shrinks properly and the adhesive gets activated. To remove the old stereo, I'll use a trim tool and a 10mm socket and wrench with extension. I also have various sizes of Phillips head and flathead screwdrivers, some 1/4-inch flat washers, zip ties, and flush cutters to trim the zip ties cleanly without leaving a sharp edge that could scratch. So let's go through all the wires that came with the Pioneer stereo now. On this connector, we have the backup camera input, a mute wire that will not be used, and steering wheel controls input. Next, we have an auxiliary in connector. I won't be using this since the car has a USB port for the auxiliary already. And we also have a Sirius XM tuner connector. For anyone interested in XM radio, the tuner can be bought separately, and I'll have a link to it in the video description. The next connector provides line outputs for an external amplifier. I'm not using an external amp, so I won't be connecting this one. And finally, we have the main wiring harness and the USB cable. If the vehicle doesn't have a USB port, this USB cable can be plugged into the back of the stereo and the other end to a mobile or storage device. Alright, so I'll quickly go through the wire functions from the main harness now. Keep in mind that functions and their corresponding color may vary between stereo models, so make sure not to rely on the wire colors shown in this video. Always use the manual for your stereo to identify the colors and their function, and keep in mind that connecting the wrong wires together can cause damage to the car and the stereo. So on this connector, we have a wire for ground. We have a constant 12-volt wire, which keeps the radio clock running even when the car is off. We have a switched 12-volt wire, which turns the stereo on when the ignition is turned on. We have a reverse gear input wire. This tells the stereo when the shifter is in reverse to display the backup camera. We have an illumination wire, so when the headlamps are turned on at night, the brightness of the stereo will go down. And we have a parking brake wire that the stereo uses for safety, and when the parking brake is engaged, it will allow watching videos and pairing a phone using Bluetooth. We also have a system remote control wire, which I'll use to power the radio antenna booster. And finally, there are 4 pairs of outputs for the front and rear speakers. Let's go over the CRUX harness connectors now. The first connector is for the steering wheel controls, and it has a 3.5mm jack output that plugs into the 3.5mm input that I showed you earlier on the stereo. Next, we have a 24-pin to 16-pin converter. This connector is only required for certain Toyota models that do not have a factory 24-pin connector. The next connector is for the radio antenna, and the blue wire is an antenna turn-on wire which powers the motor or radio antenna booster on certain car models. For my 2014 Corolla, this wire powers the radio antenna booster, and if it's not connected, radio reception will be very poor. The CRUX harness has 2 options for hooking up the antenna turn-on wire, and as indicated in the manual, The one that's populated on the factory connector is the one that should be connected. So let's check which wire is populated on the factory connector. I'll check the back of the 10-pin connector and the antenna connector. Here's the back of the 10-pin connector. It doesn't have a wire where the antenna turn-on wire should be. And here's the radio antenna connector. And this one does have the wire for the antenna turn-on. So this is the one that I will connect. When connecting it, it's important to make sure it's only connected to one circuit from the aftermarket stereo, as indicated in the manual, and I'll be connecting it to the system remote control wire from the stereo, which provides a maximum of 300 milliamps. And just to be safe, I'm gonna do a quick test and measure how much current the radio antenna amplifier on this car will draw. So the radio amplifier is only drawing 56 milliamps, which means that the 300 milliamps from the system remote control wire is more than enough. The next connector is for the USB port, which is in the center console for this car. And we have a parking brake wire, which comes separately outside of its connector. Depending on the car model, it will have to be inserted in a certain position on the 28-pin connector from the CRUX. Alright, so let's quickly go through the functions of the wires on the main harness now. The wire labeled with a VSS tag is for the vehicle speed sensor. The Pioneer doesn't need this though, so we won't use it. The red and white RCAs are for auxiliary input, and I have a USB auxiliary, so I don't need this either. The yellow RCA is for the backup camera, and the wire labeled with reverse gear is for the reverse gear input. The blue wire with the white stripe doesn't have any function, and the solid blue wire is for the radio antenna turn-on from the 10-pin connector, which I will not be connecting as discussed earlier. And the remaining wires are for the speakers, illumination, and to power the stereo. Alright, so we've gone through all of the connectors from the stereo and the CRUX. Let's configure the CRUX kit now. For the Corolla, I'll insert the parking brake wire into position number 15 on the 28-pin connector. Make sure the locking tab is always facing up, and I'm gonna push it in all the way, making sure that it locks in. Now pull lightly to make sure that it's locked, and check the other side to make sure that the pin came out straight. So my pin is a little bit bent, and I'm gonna use a flathead screwdriver to straighten it out. So there we go, I got it nice and straight, and this connector is ready to be hooked up now. Let's set the dip switches now. Make sure to follow the manual for the proper settings. I'm gonna set the stereo to Pioneer and the car make to Toyota. To set a switch to on, flip it to the side labeled on, and make sure to double check that they are set correctly, otherwise the module will not work. And now I'm ready to connect the stereo harness to the CRUX harness. Don't forget to put the heat shrink on first, it's very easy to forget. And I'm using a really nice high quality heat shrink that has a thicker wall and adhesive on the inside that provides exceptional insulation and durability. Now to solder the wires together, I'll start by twisting the strands on each end first. This will ensure that the strands stay together. Overlap them to form an X, and twist the wire strands together. It's very important that the strands flow together smoothly without sticking out. If there are any strands sticking out, then sharp spots will be created once they're soldered over, which can puncture the heat shrink and cause a short circuit. So the joint is ready for soldering. I'm gonna start by applying heat from below for a few seconds to heat it up. And once it's hot, I'm gonna apply solder directly to the strands. Now I'll inspect all the connections I made to make sure there are no sharp spots, and if there are any sharp spots, they can be flattened down with a pair of pliers. The heat shrink should slide easily over the joint, and if it doesn't, then there's likely a sharp spot, which should be smoothed out. And now I'll heat up the heat shrink with my heat gun. This is the best tool to use for this, and it will ensure that the tube shrinks evenly and the adhesive melts and glues onto the wire, creating a perfect seal. Next, I'll cap the ends of the unused wires with heat shrink. And now I'll apply heat to the tube, with the tube sticking out about 1/4 inch past the end of the wire until glue squeezes out from the end, indicating that the adhesive has melted on. Let's make the remaining connections now. I'll plug in the CRUX module, make sure the connectors are locked in, connect the backup camera, and plug in the steering wheel controls jack. Now plug the connectors into the stereo to see how they line up. And I'll wrap the harness with electrical tape to protect the wires from rubbing on any sharp surfaces inside the dashboard. Low quality tape tends to fall off when it gets hot, so it's very important to use high quality tape like Tessa tape or 3M Super 33 Plus. Alright, so the wiring is done, and I'm gonna get the trim cover ready now. The trim cover comes with 2 clips that are mounted on the back using 2 screws, and to put them on, I'll start by putting in the first screw. Make sure to use the proper size Phillips head for this screw. Now slide the clip under the screw, and put in the second screw. When tightening these screws, keep in mind that they're tightening into plastic, and the threads can break easily if they're over-tightened. Now I'll transfer the yellow clips from the stock stereo to the Metra bracket, and I'm gonna use 2 small flathead screwdrivers for this. Slide one underneath the clip at the top, and slide the other one under the bottom, and the clip should come right out. Now to install it, open the prongs slightly and hold it open, and push it down over the clip. And I'll do the same for the other 3 clips as well. And this trim cover is now ready to be installed. Let's install the mounting brackets to the stereo now. The side they go on is printed right onto the bracket, and the stereo comes with some panhead screws and tapered screws. To mount the brackets, I'm gonna use the tapered screws. Start by lining up the bracket with the 2 front holes on the stereo, and make sure it overlaps over the plastic bezel. Now I'll install the screws, and I'll leave them just a little bit loose. This way the bracket will still move slightly to allow adjusting the depth and angle once it's mounted in the dashboard. And I did the same for the other side as well. Now I'll go ahead and remove the old stereo, then install the new one. I'll start by disconnecting the negative battery cable first. This is done for safety and to avoid damage to the electrical system. Now I'll open the glove box and use my trim tool to remove the side cover. And once it's unclipped, just pull it out. Now to remove the instrument trim panel, I'll use my trim tool and gently pry it out. It's held in with clips on the top, bottom, and both sides, so care must be taken to release the clips slowly. So I got it out far enough on the right side here. Now the clips can be disengaged by hand, so I will gently pull along the top and the bottom at the same time, making sure not to pull too hard or suddenly to avoid breaking the trim. The bottom clips come out easier, and to disengage the top, a lot of care must be taken, and I'm gonna gently use my trim tool here to make sure I don't break any of the clips. Once the trim is completely disengaged, make sure not to pull on it suddenly, because there are still 2 electrical connectors attached to it. To remove the hazard lights connector, press on the tab and pull it out, and the other connector is for the passenger airbag light, so disconnecting it could trigger an airbag light warning, so I'm gonna use my trim tool and I'll pry on the side to remove the entire unit. This way the electrical connector stays connected and there is no chance that the airbag light will turn on. Now to remove the stereo, I'll use a 10mm socket with extension and remove the 2 bolts on each side. And now I'll pull out the stereo. Some of the connectors at the back will come out easily, while others can be difficult to pull out, so I like to use a small flathead screwdriver to pry them out carefully if they don't come out easily. Now I'll try the new stereo on, and adjust how the brackets fit, so I'm not connecting the wires for now. I'll tighten the bolts hand tight, making sure they're screwed all the way in without tightening them too hard for now. The stereo should be pushed in all the way in as far as it will go in the dashboard. And I'm gonna put the trim cover on top now. Make sure it's seated fully. And now I'll adjust the angle and the depth of the stereo to match with the opening in the trim cover. So even with the stereo tilted all the way down, there's still a fairly big gap remaining at the bottom. The sides are perfect though, and the top is also good. The depth is also perfect, the face of the stereo is touching the cover, and there's no gap in between at all. So I'll tighten the mounting screws in the brackets to lock this position in. And to fix the gap on the bottom, I'm gonna use some flat washers later and place them under the mounting bracket. Now I'll remove the trim plate and the stereo and install one more screw for the mounting bracket to ensure that the stereo is held in tightly. Let's prepare the wiring now. I'll connect the 6 connectors from the CRUX harness to the factory connectors on the car and connect the other ends to the back of the stereo. One of the connectors here is for the microphone, which is required for making phone calls. I already installed mine at the top of the windshield, and to keep this video short, I'm gonna show how I did that in a separate video, which will be linked up in the cards. So I have all the connectors hooked up. Now I will bundle everything together to keep the wires and module secure using a zip tie. And it's best to trim the excess using flush cutters for a clean edge to make sure it doesn't end up sharp and it doesn't scratch. Now I'll tape 2 washers together and tape them to the back of the bracket on the top mounting bolts. So I'm gonna install the bolts just loosely so I can pull the tape off. And now just pull to remove it. Now I'll put the remaining bolts in loosely, place the trim cover on, and line up the stereo so that it's centered with the opening in the trim cover and the gaps on the sides are even. So the bottom gap is much smaller now with the 2 washers in place, the sides are perfect, and the top looks good as well. Now I can go ahead and tighten the bolts down. To reinstall the dashboard, I'll start by inserting the airbag light module first. Just push it back in. And I'll reconnect the hazard lights button connector. Now carefully line up the trim back in place. And to re-engage the clips, I'll start by pushing down on the corners on the left side and work my way towards the right, gently pressing it down. And to reinstall the side cover, push it back in behind the weather stripping and press on it to snap the clips back in. And now I'll reconnect the battery and then we can listen to the new stereo. So let's hear what the new stereo sounds like. I recorded a sound sample with the previous stereo and the new one, and I'll play them side by side now so you can hear the difference. If you found this video useful, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Your support is really appreciated. And consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be posting more videos in the future. Thanks for watching!